A cold wind moved through the stone walls of the castle of Lorraine, carrying the sound of trumpets and the rhythm of marching feet. A new group of guards had arrived from the southern provinces, their armor shining as they crossed the iron gates. The morning sun rose behind the towers, giving the place a golden glow. The people in the courtyard stopped their work to watch. It had been many months since the queen had called for new soldiers. Everyone could feel that something important was about to happen. High above, on the wide balcony, Queen Alara stood still. She wore a plain blue dress, her silver crown resting lightly on her dark hair. Her face was calm, but inside her chest, her heart was heavy. The war had taken nearly everything from her peace, her laughter, and her husband, Captain Adrian Vale, who had never returned from the Northern Front. His loss had left a quiet emptiness in her life. She had seen brave soldiers since then, but none had ever made her heart move again. The sound of metal on stone drew her attention back to the courtyard. The first line of guards had passed the gates, and among them walked a tall man in old armor. His uniform looked simple and worn, not that of a proud knight, but of someone who had worked long days without rest. He did not speak much. He only looked ahead, following his place in line. When he lifted his helmet off, the light hit his face, and a breath escaped the queen's lips. Her hand gripped the edge of the balcony. The man below had the same strong jaw, the same calm blue eyes, the same quiet confidence that Adrian once had. For a moment, it felt as though time had turned back. Every memory she had buried came alive again in one single heartbeat. Her advisor, Lord Kennan, stepped closer, thinking she looked displeased. "Your Majesty, the southern unit has arrived," he said softly. "Shall I have them sworn in?" She did not answer at once. Her eyes stayed fixed on the man. It was impossible, yet there he stood. Finally, she nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," she said. "Bring him in." The new guards formed their line in the great hall of stone. Queen Alara walked among them, her steps graceful but slow. Each soldier bowed deeply when she passed. When she came to the tall man, he bowed as well, his eyes meeting hers only for a second. That second felt like an hour. "What is your name?" the queen asked, trying to keep her voice even. "Captain Ethan Ward," the man replied. His tone was respectful, his words simple. "I served with the border regiment under Commander Lyle, Your Majesty." His voice hit her like a forgotten note from an old song. The same tone, same calm rhythm of a soldier who once told her he would always return. Her chest tightened. "Your service is noted," she managed to say. "We'll be stationed at the eastern watchtower until further orders." Ethan nodded. "Da-da-da-da-da, as you command, my queen." When he stepped back into the line, she turned away before anyone could see the pain in her eyes. She left the hall quietly, her thoughts spinning. The resemblance could not be real. There had to be an explanation, yet every movement, every look, reminded her too much of Adrian. That night, Alara stood alone at the tower window. The moonlight traced the edges of the city roofs. She remembered how Adrian used to stand beside her on nights like this, his laughter soft, his hand warm against hers. 5 years had passed since his last goodbye. She had made herself strong. She had built a wall around her heart to keep her grief hidden from her people. But that wall now shook like glass in a storm. Outside, down in the courtyard, Ethan Ward kept watch. The torchlight washed over his armor, turning the metal a dull gold. He looked up once toward the queen's balcony and thought, for no clear reason, that he had stood in that spot before. Something deep inside him stirred a memory that was not his to own. A woman's voice calling a name he did not know, snow falling on a battlefield, a hand reaching out, then darkness. He pushed the thought away. It was only exhaustion, he told himself.
Ow!
But still, the feeling would not leave. Up in her chamber, Queen Alara closed her eyes. The face of the new guard would not leave her mind.
Owie.
It was as if the past had risen from its grave to stand in front of her again. She whispered to the silence, "Adrian, what trick of fate is this?" The candles burned low as the night deepened. Two souls, both haunted by the same echo, stood beneath the same skywan, remembering one wondering. The wind moved through the castle again, gentle but cold, carrying the promise that their quiet, fragile lives were about to change forever. Days passed quietly after the new guards arrived, but the air inside the castle felt different. The queen noticed it, though no one dared to speak of it. The memory of that morning stayed with her like a shadow she could not escape. Each time she thought of the new guard, Ethan Ward, her heart twisted between disbelief and longing. She told herself that he was only a man, a soldier who happened to share the face of her lost husband. She thought that time would dull the shock, but it did not. Ethan served with steady focus. He rose before dawn, trained the young guards, and kept his post without complaint. He was known for his calm nature, spoke little, but when he did, others listened. Even the rough soldiers obeyed him without question. There was something in his voice that carried quiet strength, something that made people trust him. One evening, the royal steward called his name and told him that the Queen had ordered an inspection of the Eastern Watchtower. Ethan was to lead a small group of guards to report back to her. It was a simple task, but it brought a nervous feeling he could not explain. The next morning, when Ethan entered the throne room with his report, he saw Queen Alara standing beside the window, the sunlight falling over her like gold. She turned to him, her face calm but her eyes unreadable. "Captain Ward," she said softly, "come forward." He bowed. "Your Majesty." She reached for the parchment he held, their hands touching for a brief moment. That single touch sent a strange shiver through both of them. She thanked him, but her voice faltered. The hall was quiet except for the sound of the distant fountain outside. "You served in the South before coming here?" the Queen asked. "Yes, Your Majesty," Ethan said. "I guarded the trade routes. Before that, I worked on the northern borders for a short time." The Queen looked at him sharply. "The North?" she asked. "You were there?" "For a few months," he answered. "It was a hard place. Cold, silent. Many battles had already ended before I arrived. There were ruins still marked by fire." Her fingers tightened around the parchment. "Did you ever hear of Captain Adrian Vale?" Ethan hesitated. "I have heard the name," he said slowly. "Many soldiers spoke of him. They said he was brave, that he never left a man behind." The Queen turned away to hide the tear that had begun to form in her eyes. She whispered, "He was my husband." Ethan felt a deep pull in his chest, a feeling he did not understand. For a moment he saw a flash in his mind, snow falling, a battlefield, a woman's voice calling a name through the wind. He blinked, and it was gone, leaving only confusion behind. "Your Majesty," he said softly, "I did not mean to bring sorrow." She shook her head. "No, it is not sorrow, only a memory that refuses to fade." Days turned into weeks. The Queen and the guards saw each other often, not by choice, but by duty. She began to speak with him about matters beyond the army, about the rebuilding of the villages, about peace, about the struggles of her people. He answered simply, with respect, but she noticed how his thoughts were always kind and just. His manner reminded her too much of Adrian. Rumors began to spread through the castle. Servants whispered in the corridors that the Queen spent too much time speaking with the new guard. Some believed she saw in him the ghost of her husband. Others thought she had finally found someone she could trust in a palace full of politics. One night, rain fell hard over the castle roofs. The Queen could not sleep. She went to the old library, where firelight cast long shadows between the shelves. To her surprise, Ethan stood near the window, quietly setting a candle on the table. He bowed when he saw her. "My Queen," he said softly, "I did not know you would be here." "It is my habit when I cannot rest," she replied with a gentle smile. Thunder rolled beyond the towers. They stood in silence for a moment. Then she spoke. "Tell me, Captain, do you ever feel as though you have lived a life that you cannot remember?" Ethan frowned slightly. "Sometimes," he admitted, "I dream of places I do not know, faces I have never seen. They feel real, but when I wake, they fade away." The Queen looked into his eyes. "Perhaps memories have a way of finding new homes," she said. Ethan did not understand, but something in her voice filled him with quiet hope and fear at once. The candlelight flickered, painting soft light across their faces. Outside, the rain fell like a song that only the lonely could hear. The Queen watched him for a long moment, then turned back to the shelves. "Tomorrow," she said, trying to steady her voice, "there will be a ceremony in the courtyard. You will stand beside me. It is time the people see that peace is born from loyalty." "Yes, my Queen," he said. His words were firm, but inside his heart a strange warmth began to grow. That night, Long after they both left the library, neither of them found rest. Ethan's dreams were filled with echoes of another life, another love, and the Queen, staring out her window, knew that the stranger who bore her husband's face was drawing her into a story that fate had already begun to write. The days after the rain were calm at first, but a quiet tension began to grow in the castle of Lorraine. The Queen's advisors talked in low voices about unrest returning to the northern border. Bandits and lost soldiers still roamed the broken lands where the last war had burned so much. The Queen feared that the same violence would rise again if she did not act. She decided to send a small group to the north to recover old records that had been lost in those battles. Those records carried the last orders of the royal army. Ethan Ward was the first name she wrote on the assignment. He had served on that border before, and his calm strength made the people trust him. She would not admit it aloud, but she also wanted to see if the North would stir any truth in him. Something deep inside told her that part of the answer to his strange resemblance to Adrian was hiding up there, among the ruins and the snow. When the Queen told her council of her plan to travel with the soldiers herself, they tried to stop her. They said it was too dangerous, that her presence would draw threats. She listened to their warnings, but said quietly, "A ruler cannot fear the places her people have bled for." Her words ended the argument. 3 days later, before sunrise, the small group left the castle. Horses snorted in the cold air, and lanterns swung from their saddles. Ethan rode at the front with a few knights. The Queen rode behind them, her cloak pulled close. The road stretched far ahead like a silver line under the moon. The land grew colder as they moved north. Villages became fewer, trees taller, and the ground harder. The silence of the north had a strange weight to it. Ethan felt it pressing at his thoughts. Each day, dreams from his past grew stronger. He saw flashes again, a white battlefield, a hand reaching out. The sound of a woman crying, a name that broke his heart even though he did not know why. After several days, the group reached the remains of the old fortress called the Stone Vale. The war had left it in ruins. Half the towers had fallen, and the air smelled of dust and frost. Broken flags hung like ghosts over the empty halls. The Queen dismounted first, her eyes scanning the place. "He fought here," she whispered. This is where the Northern War ended. Inside one of the crumbling rooms, the soldiers began to search. Papers were scattered across the ground, burned and torn. Ethan knelt beside a half-broken chest and found a bundle of scrolls wrapped in cloth. He opened one and saw the crest of Lorraine stamped on the wax. "These must be the old military records," he said. The Queen stepped closer and took one of the scrolls. When her eyes ran over the faded words, her face went pale. There was a name repeated on several of the pages: Captain Adrian Vale. The record listed his final mission, the one from which he never returned. At the end of the page, there was a note written in another hand, a different ink, and it caught her eye. It mentioned an experiment done by the royal alchemists. An attempt to preserve the spirit and memories of fallen officers through a rare process tested during the war. The note was vague, but spoke of memory preservation and transfer into rescued soldiers who had lost consciousness or identity in battle. Ethan's hands trembled slightly as she read it aloud. His chest felt tight. "That sounds like something impossible," he said quietly, though his voice shook. The Queen looked at him with eyes full of both fear and wonder. "Adrian died in the north," she said softly. "But his body was never returned to me. Only his sword and his crest." The fire they had lit flickered and threw strange shadows on the wall. Ethan suddenly stepped back, his mind spinning. Images came against no, shouting pain, a flash of fire, someone pushing him to safety. Heard a voice in his head, calm and firm, saying, "Live, for her." When he came back to himself, the Queen was beside him. She reached out as if she already knew. "Ethan," she whispered, "tell me truthfully. Have you ever, even once, remembered my name before it was given to you in this castle?" His lips parted. "Yes," he said slowly, his voice breaking. "In my dreams, the name Alara comes again and again, though I never knew anyone by that name before I met you." Neither spoke for a long time. Cold wind blew through the open walls of the ruins, carrying the echo of lost years. The Queen closed the scroll and looked out over the snowy hills. She no longer knew if she was standing beside a new man or the shadow of the one she had lost. But she did know that fate had led her there for a reason that both comforted and frightened her. When they returned to camp that night, the snow began to fall again. The queen sat beside the fire, holding the old scroll like a secret. Ethan stood guard nearby, his face turned to the dark sky. Neither of them could sleep. Both carried questions that words could not reach. And both felt the strange certainty that the story between them was not yet done. The journey back from the north was quiet. Snow covered the road, and the sky stayed pale and gray for days. The queen rode without speaking much. The wind bit her cheeks, but she hardly noticed. Her thoughts were buried deep in the words of those old scrolls and in the strange storm that had begun in her heart. Every time she looked at Ethan Ward, she saw both the man before her and the memory of the husband she had lost years ago. Ethan rode ahead, leading the soldiers through the frozen passes. Tried to keep his mind clear, but no matter how hard he focused on the road, voices kept whispering in his head. He heard the sounds of battle, the cries of soldiers, the same woman's voice calling a name through the roar of the wind. That voice always reached him before any other. It brought warmth and pain at the same time, as if some spirit inside him remembered a love that his mind could not explain. When they returned to the castle, the great gates opened with a slow groan. Servants came to meet them, taking the queen's cloak and the horses. The queen thanked her soldiers and told them to rest. Before she left the courtyard, she turned to Ethan. For a long moment their eyes locked, and neither of them moved. Then she spoke softly, almost afraid someone else might hear. "Come to the royal hall at dusk," she said. "There is something I must ask you." Ethan bowed. "As you command, my queen." When he came that evening, the great hall was nearly empty. Only a few candles burned, the light soft and golden. The queen stood by the window, the cold air from outside, brushing her hair across her shoulder. She did not wear her crown. Her face looked younger, almost peaceful, but her eyes carried the weight of someone standing on the edge of truth. "You wish to see me?" Ethan said quietly. She turned to face him. "Yes," she said. "We both saw what was written in those records. You felt something there, did you not?" Ethan hesitated. "I do not know what I felt," he said. "But it was like remembering a life that was never mine." The queen stepped closer. "During the war," she said, "my husband commanded an army near those northern fortresses. When the fighting ended, his body was never found. There were rumors that the alchemists tried strange things in those days, trying to save soldiers who were too wounded to live. When you stood there, I saw the same look in your eyes that he had before he said goodbye to me for the last time." Ethan's voice was low. "Do you believe that I am him?" She shook her head slowly. "No," she said gently. "I do not think you are the same man. But I think... a piece of him lives in you somehow. Maybe memory is stronger than we understand. Maybe the soul finds ways to return even when the body does not." The silence that followed was long and heavy. Ethan wanted to speak, but his throat tightened. He took a deep breath and said, "When I sleep, I see a woman in blue standing beside a window. I always thought it was a dream, but now I know her face is yours. Each time I wake, I feel both whole and lost at once." A single tear slipped down the queen's cheek. "Fate is cruel," she whispered. "It brings us the echo of what we had, but never the same song again." Ethan bowed his head. "I would never wish to hurt you, my queen. Whatever strange truth ties us, I will serve you with all that I am." She came closer still, her hand trembling as she touched his cheek. "You already do," she said quietly. "You already keep his promise." The doors of the hall opened as one of her counselors entered, breaking the moment. The queen quickly turned away, hiding her face. The counselor announced that trouble had begun again near the eastern border and asked for her command. Without hesitation, she ordered preparations for defense. Ethan volunteered to lead the first patrol. She allowed it, though her heart ached at the thought of danger finding him again. That night, after the council ended, Ethan stood in the courtyard readying his armor. The queen came down the steps to meet him. The snow had begun to fall again. She looked up at him and said quietly, "Do not be reckless. We have already lost too much to the north wind." He gave her a faint smile. "I will return," he said. "I do not know why I feel certain, but I do." As he rode out into the night, the queen watched the torches fade one by one. Her heart felt torn between hope and fear. She remembered Adrian riding out years ago, promising the same thing, yet something inside her whispered that this time might be different. Long after the courtyard was empty, she stood alone in the falling snow, whispering into the quiet air. "If you truly carry his strength," she said, "then come back to me once more, somewhere beyond the hills." Ethan rode into the darkness, the shape of her words echoing in his mind like a vow. In his heart a faint warmth began to rise, a memory or a promise. He no longer knew which. But he knew he would fight, not only for duty, but for the woman whose face had haunted both his dreams and the forgotten life buried deep inside him. The morning after Ethan rode out, the sky was gray and thick with clouds. The queen stood by the window of her chamber, watching her breath fog the glass. Below her, the courtyard was empty except for a few stable hands tending to horses. The silence made the castle feel larger and colder than before. She pressed her hand against the cold stone, her heart heavy with worry. Every sound that echoed through the halls made her turn her head, hoping that it might be news from the east. Ethan had left with a group of soldiers to guard the villages along the border. That region had once been full of forests and farms, but now much of it lay broken from years of war. The people there had little trust for soldiers, but Ethan spoke gently to them, reminding them that peace could return if they stood together. His voice carried calm strength, and soon the villagers began to believe him. As the days passed, the queen received small reports from messengers saying the villages were safe and the patrols were steady. Still, she could not shake the quiet fear inside her. Each morning she prayed for his safety, though she never said his name aloud. At night she dreamed the same dream again, and again a battlefield covered in snow. A man falling, a voice calling out for him. In her dream she reached for him, but he always drifted away like smoke. Then one night, a horn sounded from the eastern tower. The queen rushed from her chamber, her cloak trailing behind her as she ran through the corridors. The guards opened the gate, letting in riders covered in mud and snow. One of them fell from his horse, kneeling before the queen. He gasped. Bandits attacked from the mountain path. Captain Ward held them off, but he stayed behind when the bridge collapsed. No one has seen him since. The queen's breath caught in her throat. The world seemed to blur around her. She gripped the man's shoulder tightly and said, "How long has it been?" "2 days, my queen," he said. "We searched, but the river below is deep. The men believe he fell into it." She closed her eyes, her hands shaking. "Oh," she said softly, "not again." Without waiting for counsel or advice, the queen ordered her horse brought to her. Her attendants pleaded for her not to go, but she ignored them. "I lost him once," she whispered. "I will not lose him again." By the time she reached the broken bridge, night had fallen. The wind tore through the trees, and the snow glowed faintly under the moon. The smell of smoke still hung in the air. She climbed down the rocky slope with her guards, her torch lighting the dark path. Pieces of wood from the bridge lay scattered beside the roaring river. "Search," she called out. "Call his name." For hours they searched along the banks. At last, one of the guards shouted, "Here!" cried. They ran to the sound and found Ethan lying near the shore, half conscious, his arm bruised and his clothes torn. The queen knelt beside him as the guards lifted him gently. His eyes fluttered open, and even in his weakness, he smiled faintly. "Came," he whispered. She brushed the wet hair from his face. "Of course I came," she said, her voice breaking. "Promise to return." He tried to speak again, but pain stopped him. The guards carried him back to camp, where they built a small fire and wrapped him in blankets. The queen stayed beside him, refusing to sleep. When finally his eyes opened again, he looked at her with quiet wonder. "I remember now," he said softly. "Before the river took me, something returned. Your name, your face, the sound of your laughter. I remembered everything. I was Adrian, was the man who said goodbye to you on the morning of that last battle." The queen felt tears fall freely. "Then it is true?" she asked. He nodded weakly. "Not every memory is clear, and not every part of him remains. But his love for you never left. Somehow it found its way into me." The queen took his hand and held it close to her heart. "Then you must live," she said quietly. "Live for both of us now." Days later, they returned to Lorraine. The castle bells rang again, not for mourning this time, but for hope. Ethan's wounds healed slowly, But each time he saw the queen, strength returned to his eyes. He no longer questioned who he was. He understood that he carried two stories inside him, one that had ended in sorrow and one still being written. On a clear morning when the sun rose over the hills, he stood once more in the courtyard wearing his armor. The queen came down the steps and looked at him with a calm smile. "Are you ready to take your place again?" she asked. He nodded. "For as long as there is breath in me," the people cheered as he took his post beside the gates. The queen looked up to the sky, her heart lighter than it had been in years. For the first time since the war, she felt that peace had more than one meaning. As the day ended, Ethan stood guard beneath the same balcony where she had first seen him. The light from the setting sun touched the castle walls, and for a moment, the shadows of the past seemed to fade. The queen stood above, watching quietly, her eyes warm with gratitude. They had both been broken by time, yet somehow, through pain and chance, they had found one another again. And in that simple silence between them, lay the beginning of a new story, one written not by fate, but by the choice to keep living, keep hoping, and keep guarding what love had rebuilt.